1985-86, Cannon Division 4, 20th, Milk Cup first round, FA Cup first round. Halifax Town's fifth re-election application could and perhaps should have been their last, but they were fortunate to have so many sympathisers within the Football League. They were voted back in with 48 votes, while non-league Enfield, the Gola League champions, the new name of the Alliance Premier League, received just 8. Northampton 52, Stockport and Torquay with 50 votes each were also re-elected, but not for much longer could clubs like this count on the Old Pals Act to retain their league status. The following year, the league decided to introduce automatic exchange between the bottom club in Division 4 and the winners of the Gola League. There was one surprising omission from Mick Jones's first retained list, that of skipper Alan Little. Also shown the door were David McNiven, Steve Brooks, Jeff Cook, Chris Moises, Gary Watson and Mark Greenway. But there was no shortage of quality with the players Jones brought in. The experienced Billy Kellock arrived from Peterborough, winger Gary Nicholson, Mansfield Town, defender Phil Brown, Hartlepool United. Brown would be appointed skipper, and exciting young forward David Longhurst from Nottingham Forest. All these players, however, were joining a club in a mess. As well as their poor recent league form, Halifax Town had revealed debts of £193,000 and had been hit harder than most when, following the Bradford City fire disaster the previous May, new regulations necessitated expensive ground improvements at the Shea. A ground improvement fund, headed by Northampton businessman Chris Stevenson, was launched on the 14th of July, but for the first 3 matches at the Shea, all standing areas were closed off. Doubtless such restrictions had a bearing on attendances. Only 890 turned up for the first leg of Town's Milk Cup tie with 2nd Division Hull City. The Shaymen actually performed credibly in that game, drawing 1-1 but were humbled in the return at Boothferry Park. In the league they made a pleasing start with 3 wins from their opening 6 matches, putting Halifax among the leaders, but then they lost their way completely. They went on a run of 13 games without a win, and a 4-0 defeat at Northampton left them in 23rd place. At one point, Jones told his players, "Work together or leave." If he was expecting an immediate positive response, he was to be disappointed. The Did You Know section from this chapter. Town broke their own transfer record when they sold Rick Holden, £125,000, Lee Richardson, £175,000, and Wayne Allison, £250,000, all to Watford. November saw Town bow out of the FA Cup at home to Scunthorpe, despite taking an early lead. But in early December their run of terrible results was ended when Simon Lowe scored the only goal to sink Hereford. Victories should also have been achieved in Town's next 2 games, but they squandered a 2-goal lead at Swindon and lost 2-3. Then worse at Scunthorpe, they allowed the home side to claw back 3 goals to earn a point. As the season went into January, Town once again looked doomed to re-election. Mick Jones knew he needed new players, but with hardly any money in the kitty, he had to rectify the situation himself. Splitting the proceeds 50-50 with Martin House, a home in Boston Spa for the terminally ill, he undertook a sponsored walk to Preston, where the Shaymen were playing on the 11th of January, to buy a player. Perhaps viewing this as an incentive, the Shaymen won at Deepdale, courtesy of a Billy Kellock header. The victory did not immediately win back the fans who had been conspicuous by their absence. The home game of Colchester at the end of January attracted just 989, but that was not the lowest gate at the Shea that season. A meaningless Freight Rover Trophy game with Lincoln, Scunthorpe had already won the group, had been postponed several times because of bad weather. It was hurriedly arranged for the afternoon of the 11th of February and was watched by a mere 150, the official gate, though a head count by the Courier report put the figure at a more precise 122. With the arrival of striker Barry Diamond from Rochdale and central defender Mick Galloway on loan from Mansfield, Galloway would eventually be signed for £1,500 with money raised from Mick Jones's sponsored walk. Town's league fortunes during February and March changed dramatically. The side won 6 of the next 7 performances and climbed out of the bottom 4 to a lofty 16th, the best performances of the season being a sequence of a 5-2 home win over Wrexham and a David Longhurst-inspired 3-1 victory at Rochdale. But the good run could not last. It came to an end at Rochdale and Town struggled thereafter, slipping back into their old losing ways. All the while, the town directors had been examining ways of taking the club forward, with another ground sharing scheme with the rugby club top of the agenda. The two parties sat down for talks in January, with the main option being for Halifax Town to move up to Frum Hall. Inevitably, as in 1981, the talks broke down, but at least relations between the two football codes had improved greatly. At the beginning of the season, Halifax RLFC chairman David Brooke had launched a scathing attack on Halifax Town in the Evening Courier. But when the Frum Hall floodlights were blown down by gale force winds, the town board were quick to allow the rugby club to play one of its games at the Shea. On the 22nd of January, Widnes beat Halifax 15-8 on a historic night when rugby league was staged at the Shea for the first time. The season was turning into a nightmare for the soccer lovers. Whilst Halifax Town struggled to the end, the rugby club was making great strides for the league championship. They clinched it on the 20th of April by drawing with Featherstone Rovers, but days later the Shaymen responded by slipping again into the bottom four following defeat at Hereford. The consequences of another re-election bid were unthinkable, but the players tried to allay any fears by beating Port Vale 2-0 to move up to 18th. With 2 games left to play, Town was still far from safe, but after losing at home to Swindon, they were relieved to see Exeter go down at home to Crewe the following day. That meant that Town could lose their final home game, which unsurprisingly they did, and know that re-election would not be necessary. Both Halifax and Exeter had 54 points, but when Rochdale drew their outstanding fixture at Peterborough, it left the Grecians to drop into the re-election zone. Halifax Town saw out the final anxious weeks of the season without a chairman. At the end of April, John Crowther had resigned, thus ending an association with the club that stretched back to 1974, following a personal attack on him by a fellow director. "I have resigned because the backing of the board should have been unquestioned," he said. He added that boardroom difficulties had made my position untenable. But perhaps, on reflection, Crowther might like to think how he got out at the right time. And Halifax Town's annus horribilis was just about to begin.